Hi, I'm Arika, your wellness advocate, workplace realist, and your guide through the chaos of corporate culture. I'm here to stir the pot, spark real talk, and push for work environments that don't crush your soul. Welcome to the corporate culture protest, because burnout should not be a badge of honor. Allow me to introduce my amazing co host, the brilliant Dr. Chipo, a scholar and educator with a PhD in political and international studies from the Rhodes University. Her work dives deep into the power dynamics of everyday life, exploring how language, identity, and institutions shape access and inclusion, especially in higher education. She is driven by her passion for equity and transformation. We are also joined by the dynamic Jenna Bayer. Jenna is a counseling psychologist, keynote speaker, and mediator with over a decade of experience across education, business, NGO, and government sectors. A familiar voice on TV and radio, she is known for her passionate advocacy around mental health and her unwavering commitment to tackling gender-based violence. Welcome, Jenna and Dr. Chipo.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for having
Arika.
me.
Excellent.
Thank you for
So we're just going to dive right in there. We're going to talk about toxic workplaces. So, is your 9 to 5 quietly crushing your mental health? Let's talk about the trauma no one's naming, the slow burn. Let's be honest. What does it actually look like when a job starts damaging your mind and body? Jenna?
So, Arika, the first thing that sits out with me when thinking about this is chronic stress. In other words, that even when you're not at work, you can't stop thinking about it. So, fatigue, irritability, headaches, muscle tension, and a lot of it, Arika, is because of this constant pressure and more than that, lack of support. And so the impact of this over time can result in burnout and emotional exhaustion and physical exhaustion. And for me, at the heart of that is the lack of support. So that's the first one that sits out for me in terms of what I've seen the most. The second one is reduced self-esteem and confidence. So when you have been in a toxic environment over a period of time, what I've noticed is you can start to doubt your own abilities. You start becoming reluctant to take initiative because you start catastrophizing. You think, oh, if I do one thing wrong, it's going to be an absolute catastrophe. And so you fear making mistakes. And the cause of this is this constant criticism, lack of recognition, and just being undermined all the time. And so as a result, this damaging impact in your professional life can start to bleed into your personal life, and it can impact relationships, marriage, your social life, and things like that. The next one for me is a common one, is the interpersonal conflict and isolation. So of course, when you're in an environment that's toxic or you fear people, you don't trust people, you can socially withdraw and you can just fear communicating. And this is because of things like gossip and cliques and favoritism and just a lack of psychological safety. And so as a result, you feel lonely at work and you just don't the teamwork is poor, you don't collaborate with people. And so the workplace becomes a very lonely place. And that is something I've also observed, which has become very common. And then the next one is, of course, anxiety and even to the point depression, where, of course, when you worry all the time, you can eventually feel helpless to the point of becoming depression. You can lose interest. This can be a result of, like I say, the bullying, the harassment, job insecurity, or just constantly being undervalued. And that can result in clinical conditions. So that is, of course, very common. And then one more example to give, I'd say, is a risk of substance abuse and just maladaptive coping. So increased cigarette smoking, increased alcohol compensation, and overeating. Um, and it's because things have become so overwhelming, you just struggle to manage this ongoing stress. And this can lead to dependency issues. And by dependency issues, I mean dependence on a substance. And so to summarize this point, Erica, the long-term physical consequences, cardiovascular issues, gastrointestinal issues, and a weak immune system to the point where you just fear going to any job, or you just frequently change jobs. And so these are, Arika, over time, the common themes I've noticed. And what you can pick up from this is the mind-body impact, that it doesn't just impact the mind, it impacts the mind, the body, the whole being. That is what
Yes.
I've seen. Yeah.
Looks like it impacts the soul as well. I mean, I think a
And the
lot of
soul,
people
yeah.
can relate to having some of these symptoms.
Yeah.
Dr. Chopo, what do you think about the slow burn?
Well, oh, I feel like Jenna has summed up everything that we can think about as far as toxic work environments are concerned. And I think what's striking for me, like if maybe I can touch on a few points that she's mentioned, quickly got me thinking about when Jenna mentions the whole issue around self-doubt and questioning oneself while you're in the workplace, right? Draws my attention to the work of Michel Foucault when he talks about the concept of what he calls panopticism, right? So he refers to
Yes.
what's his name, Jeremy Bentham, talked about. So the idea essentially of saying that we end up exercising what is called disciplinary power over ourselves, right? So we end up disciplining ourselves and acting in certain ways when we are exposed to certain environments and what happens there. So the whole idea of panopticism then speaks to the idea of how, as a result of being in a toxic environment, you might end up, like Jenna just mentioned, experiencing self-doubt. And as a result of being undermined, you end up questioning yourself. You end up thinking, okay, am I doing things right? Am I doing things wrong? You end up internalizing what is going on around you. So the whole idea of then being undermined, the whole idea of
Mm.
being infantilized, if I can put it that way, becomes a serious problem, especially for most women in work environments, because you find that you get to a place where your authority as an individual, as an expert at something you're doing, then becomes very much undermined to a point where you begin to question yourself whether you're doing something right or wrong, or how you're supposed to then navigate in your workspace. So that in itself becomes very problematic and leads to the whole series of impact psychological that Jenna mentioned. So a lot of it is happening, especially on the psychological part of things. And what becomes dangerous then is if there is that lack of support that Jenna just spoke about, if then you don't have a sense of universalism about what is going on with you in the workplace, you end
Yeah.
up becoming isolated. You end up adopting various coping mechanisms that can be harmful, as Jenna mentioned. And sometimes it's a bit too late when intervention comes in. The damage is already done. But sometimes, because there is a serious culture of silencing that happens in corporate space, that happens in workspaces, we don't get to address things until it's unfortunately very late. And it's quite unfortunate that sometimes when intervention comes, yeah, the damage has already been done. So there's a lot that's happening in workplaces that we need to address. And like you said at the beginning, there's need to stir the pot, there's need to
Yes.
shake the environment and shake up spaces so that we can have a sense of breaking the culture of silence that
Mm.
has developed, that continues to be perpetuated in workspaces. There's a lot happening in there that we need to talk about that makes it very uncomfortable. I mean, the last thing you need is to dread going to your workplace on a Monday when Sunday evening becomes the horrible countdown to the horror that unfolds in the workplace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
wants to be in such a space. You don't want that. Your workplace ideally needs to be a place where you enjoy yourself, where you look forward to going. But when it becomes torturous, when it becomes a burden to say, ah, I'm a few hours away from Monday, then
Mm.
there's no fun in that. There can't be any fun in that. So it's quite unfortunate. A lot is going on. And thank you so much, Jenna, for highlighting all of those psychological aspects and all of those elements that you mentioned, because you unpack that so well. You do justice to that. I just literally scraped on the surface, but you've done a wonderful job of highlighting a lot of things that most people are probably taking for granted and not addressing, not knowing exactly what's going on with them in their workplace. But yeah, a lot is going on in there, hey?
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
true. There's so much going on.
Mm.
It's killing people's confidence. That's just to say the least. Um, and a lot of this is happening, and I feel like it's important for people to talk about it so they don't feel alone. People think that they're suffering in silence, but they're actually not. There's a whole lot of people out
Yeah.
there going through the same thing that I mean, we can be each other's support system, I think. And it's the
Yeah.
best thing to do is try to understand your situation. You're not imagining anything. This is actually happening to you. So um, we have to just figure out how we have to deal with this.
And just quickly, as you say, just to quickly step in on the support system. Also, when you have environments that are dog eat dog, or where there's a culture of mental health stigma, that
Yes.
is counter to a support system because people think, well, if I reveal a vulnerability, people will think I won't be able to climb the ladder or cope as a man as a in a higher position. So you could have been mugged or robbed or experienced some kind of trauma, but instead of
Mm.
thinking, oh, you can get support now, you're more worried about what people think. And that further
Mm.
exacerbates the challenges and the
Mm.
loneliness. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
If your
Mm.
workplace is more interested in deadlines than anything else, and they don't understand that by taking care of your people take care of your deadlines or your objectives.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just a simple thing of changing the way you think,
Yeah.
helping
Mm.
helping the environment to get better. I think it's quite easy, and for me, sometimes it looks as though corporates want the environment to be toxic. I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand why, but it seems as if the toxic behavior is rewarded, and good workers are suppressed. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to unpack there. But
Yeah.
what I want to move on to next is talking about gaslighting. So the gaslight loop. Why do so many
Yeah.
people blame themselves when the job is clearly the problem? Jenna,
Yeah.
if you could take us through that internalized guilt.
Okay, well, just for the listeners, just to because we hear these words a lot,
Mhm.
gaslighting and
Mm.
narcissism and all these words that are being used a lot. But
Yeah.
I wanted to actually, for the listeners, just absolutely clarify what gaslighting is. So
Okay.
remember, it's a form of psychological manipulation. It's a method of manipulation which someone causes you to doubt your reality or your memory or your perceptions. So what often happens is managers will use whether it's denial or contradictions or misinformation or misdirection to make you question yourself. And so when that keeps happening over time, this is going to erode your confidence. So common phrases like, you're overreacting, or you're too sensitive, or that never happened. And then a very common one, you're twisting things around.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so consequences, there's feelings of confusion, anxiety, loss of self-esteem, feeling powerless. And then ultimately, what then can happen is you become dependent on the manipulator. So, as an example,
Mm.
in the corporate space, a manager repeatedly shifting the blame or making you feel incompetent. So each time they shift
Mm.
the blame, you think, "Oh, I didn't do enough on this, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that." And within the gaslighting, that blame shifting is another form of manipulation. And so, along
Mm.
with then the gaslighting that happens as a result of it is, as you say earlier, Erica, is the internalized guilt. So, what can
Mm.
happen then is we end up adopting feelings of guilt that aren't fully your own or justified, but you end up blaming yourself for things that are beyond your control.
Yes.
So, how
Mm.
does this happen?
Mm.
Well, you
Mm.
expose
Mm.
you to manipulative boss. You raised in environments with guilt-based discipline, perfectionism, people pleasing, and even emotional neglect. So what ends up
Mm.
happening with this internalized guilt that many people may be able to relate to? You constantly apologize. You feel guilty for saying no or setting boundaries. You blame yourself for other people's feelings. You believe you're always the problem, or you fear disappointing others. And
Wow.
so
Mm.
there's this self-loathing that can happen, and then a big one, which I suppose leans to our title, is an inability to advocate for yourself. hence the
Mm.
culture protest, which is what we're on about. Um,
Mm.
and so because of this persistent manipulation, it can result in chronic stress. Well, what if
Mm.
I come to work today? What will it be today? What mistake will I
Mm.
make? What will they dump on me today?
Oh,
So,
yes.
and as I said earlier, this can then bleed into your personal life. And that is the deep concern, Erica. So as you can see, Erica and Dr.
Mm.
Chipo, this has
Mm.
profound consequences. Yeah.
No,
Wow.
it
Yeah.
does. It
Mm,
does.
it definitely
It does.
does.
And essentially, so I can maybe if I can just jump in, if
Sure.
it's fine before I lose my train of thought. I think it also like you're saying, Jenna, it all boils down to the institutional culture within a particular space. So when we're looking at the institutional culture, we're looking at the norms, the ways in which things are done, right? So over
Mm.
time, we have certain ways of conduct or the certain activities that get conducted in a particular space that becomes so ingrained that they get taken for granted, right? We
Mm.
when we're talking about institutional culture, we're looking at something that's established over time to be understood as the norm. So with regards to something that over time becomes then normalized, is considered to be the norm, we sometimes end up not questioning certain things, right? We sometimes end up
True.
in a place where we just take things as they are, and there's that unspoken language of you shouldn't question what's going on, right? This is how things are done, so you should not question whatever it is that's going on. So for me, it maybe also even highlights this, like you're mentioning, that it gets to a point where you absorb things that you're not meant to absorb, right? You can't question because there's also that stigma around you raising your voice to question certain things or dispute whatever decisions are made, right? So you find you get to a
Mm.
place where
Yeah.
in some cases as a woman, it becomes a case of no, she's too uptight. She needs to loosen up. Like she needs to not take everything so seriously. You
Yeah.
get easily offended, and in some way that then conditions you to be silenced, because now as you're processing things, you're thinking, am I overreacting? Am I thinking too much of this? Like, am I overthinking this? Am I overreacting? So over time, that internalization then conditions you, unfortunately, in some instances where you end up silencing yourself, not questioning, because now you're operating from a place of saying, no, no, apparently this is how things are done. Let's just keep the peace. Let me not rock the boat, and just go with the flow to a point where it compromises your mental health. It gets to compromise you, and it gets to compromise a lot about your personality, what you stand for, what then you stand up to say, this can't go with me. This is a no with me. So I think most of it at the end of the day, if you're to look at it, it boils down to the institutional culture, what's happening in that space, what has been normalized over time, what is
Yeah.
acceptable and what is taken for granted, and what are we tolerating or what are we condoning in that space, that then work negatively on our mental health and our well-being in the workspace.
And if
Mhm.
just to pop in there, there's a crucial word you use there, Dr. Cheaper, and that's normalized. In other words,
Mm,
if people keep doing this and there are no boundaries in place, then it's, well, I can keep doing this, because
definitely.
a bully or a perpetrator will always perceive silence or a lack of intervention as approval for their
Exactly.
behavior. And so if
Oh,
it keeps
yes.
happening, then as you say, Dr. Cheaper, it becomes normalized. Absolutely.
The other thing that we alluding to
Mm,
talk about is the fact that the silence culture is very much a big part of toxic work environments where if you speak up, if you say something, if you voice your opinion, if you point out something that might not look correct, you are now the troublemaker.
Mm. Yeah.
So to avoid putting that target on your back, I feel a lot of people stay silent. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you guys see this because it's easier, I guess, to manage and to just stay under the radar if you're silent.
And just by the way, that word troublemaker is actually a form of gaslighting. Because then what happens is you
mm,
Oh,
start
mm,
you, you
mm,
start thinking, oh,
mm,
maybe I caused something,
mm,
maybe I caused this, maybe my
mm,
behavior is bad. So that language is powerful. And that is something that occurs frequently, is the use of
mm.
that word. Very, very common. Yeah.
Okay, so we can actually have
And
another,
and there's a lot of seeing.
yeah,
Mm-mm.
we can
Yeah.
actually go on and I think we'll have another podcast, another episode about troublemakers or the
Mm.
perception, around that. But we're going to
But-
do all of this, guys. I just, this is important to help people understand. I mean, some of us don't even understand that we're being gaslit,
Yeah.
because we're so busy
I,
internalizing everything that you don't even know what's happening to you.
And you don't upset the apple cart because what if I get a warning or lose my job or all this? So it's just end up playing it safe. Even and
Yes,
then it
yes.
starts to
exactly.
chip away and then it starts affecting you physically. So yeah, that's why I always say, even when I give lectures or whatever it is, in the lives that you live going forward, I hope that you can feel free to speak your truth. Because
Oh,
if you don't, to the phrase I used earlier is that there's no psychological safety. And if you can't
Mm.
feel free to speak your truth, then is your space psychologically a safe one? Yeah.
no, that's so true. That's amazing. You know,
True, and
mhm.
also even as you're saying that, Jenna, something also just came to my mind that there seems to be unspoken rules and mechanisms in place to try and
Yeah.
silence people in these corporate spaces. So
Yeah.
you find that, like you mentioned, the labeling of somebody as a troublemaker because somebody has stood up for themselves to say, listen, I will not be tolerating this. I need to set my boundaries to this level and to set my boundaries up to here. There's a lot of unspoken ostracization or ostracism that happens in that space when you then stand up to say, I will not stand for this. There seems to be an unspoken culture of then isolating you when you become the one who wants to stand up and voice something. Like you're also saying that there are fears surrounding what if I get a warning, what if I lose my job, and I don't know. There seems to be this unspoken culture where you want to be the one who stands up, the Martin Luther King of the day. Then you find yourself
Yes.
being then labeled as the black sheep. And when you become the black sheep, you become the renegade. And when you become the renegade, you are the one who's now creating trouble because there are certain aspects of the institutional culture that then contribute to a space where the rhetoric around why fix it if it's not broken becomes very much the center of everything. So the moment you then want to speak up, you are perceived as somebody who's shaking the boat, right? You're perceived as
Yes.
somebody who's a troublemaker, all because you just want to stand up and address something that you feel is not speaking or is not aligning with what you stand for or what you feel should be happening in the workspace. So there's a lot, there are a lot of mechanisms that then come into play. Bullies are clever. They're always a step ahead of everybody, and they have ways to try and pin you down, to try and box you, to try and silence you. Because for them, if everything is working to their benefit, why would you want to question and have things changed? Because it's an institutional culture that's been there for long. Why do
Yeah,
you suddenly want to change things according to their perception of whatever it is that they're doing?
that's
Yeah.
100%. I
Yeah.
think it's divide and conquer. If they isolate you, no one stands with you, and that's how they win. I feel there's a lot of power in people standing together and saying, I think we've had enough of this. And I think that's where I want to get to with this podcast. I want
Yeah.
people to stand together and say, this is wrong. This is not how we treat people.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get there with, just making people aware. So let's talk a little bit about the wake up signs. What are the red flags that people ignore for too long? Um, Dr. Chippo, you talked about the Sunday scaries, Sunday evening, just dreading the next day because you have to go to work. Tell us more.
No, no, the countdown to Monday becomes something else. It's very difficult, and I think also maybe if I can speak from a place of being a working mom, right?
Mhm.
So you're in that space where you're trying to multitask. You are parenting at the same time. You are also working, and emergencies happen. Things happen along the way. I have a 7-year-old who can wake up with a cold, with a flu, and suddenly I can't make it in time to my workplace in order for me to start a lecture. Then there's a whole protocol apparently you need to follow as to when you want to reschedule class and all of that. And there are moments when that's not going to fly. That's not going to be possible for you to then call in and say, I can't come through because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have a son who is a temperature and. So there's certain structures in place as well that make it difficult for us as working moms to navigate the space of working and mothering at the same time. Because for the life of me, the protocol is just, it frustrates you because now you are receiving phone calls as you are on your way to the doctors for a doctor's appointment because you had an emergency, a child woke up not feeling well. Now it becomes a whole interrogation. Now it becomes a whole, but why are you not here? Because your student said you were not here. But meanwhile, you have an emergency that's at hand. You're trying to figure things out. So I think there's also need for our institutions, our corporate spaces to have grace towards mothers. We were trying our best out here. It's not easy navigating motherhood and work at the same time. And trust me, if you're passionate about what you do, nobody intentionally wants to miss lectures, but then they also make it so difficult to navigate that space of mothering and handling emergencies and then showing up to the 100 forms and the protocol that comes with it's almost as if it's a crime that you're a mother who wants to work, who has a child who's fallen sick and on a random Monday morning it becomes it's a lot, eh?
It
It's a
is.
lot.
It is.
So
It's a lot.
it's those moments that then get you dreading when because there's always at the back of your mind and you don't plan an emergency with a child. It happens. It just happens from nowhere. So now you're dreading that after last time there was a whole kangaroo court, a whole interrogation that happened. What if a second time comes? What if there's another moment of that will happen? So if we then lack structures that are understanding towards us trying to multitask as mothers, it becomes so difficult and draining and extremely difficult for us to navigate spaces as mothers, academics who also still want to show up and do their best at their workplaces. So come on, we need a little bit of grace. We really do.
Yeah, you're going through an emergency and now you're traumatized because you're worried about what is going to happen at work. Your focus should be on
It's
your
a lot
child.
because
Yeah.
exactly. So now there's random calls happening. No, so and so is calling, asking why you're not here. You need to be here in the next hour. And you're like, but I have something that's of equally important, or maybe even extremely important. My child's life is on the line. So must I what drop my child off at the doctor's and quickly rush to like honestly, why are we making it if it's rock science that we can reschedule class for another time because I have an emergency?
Yes, of course. And that's
I
reasonable
don't I
to,
don't get it.
it's a reasonable request. Your son is not getting sick every week. It's quite reasonable. And even if your child is sickly, I mean, then the institution has to understand what measures are they putting in place to help. Maybe online lectures, something, are they doing anything to assist?
That's
And
the thing.
hmm,
Because it ends up becoming an issue of expecting too much from working moms without providing the necessary support structures for them to navigate that space. Because trust me, we love our jobs. We also equally or more than that love our kids. And there's no way I'm going to prioritize my job over my child if my child is not feeling well. Everybody can wait. The world can come to a standstill until my child is sorted. I will not budge and I will show up for my child before I can let my job get me going crazy because I'm also mothering at the same time. We don't cease to exist in our other identities as we navigate our way around in work environments and corporate space. We don't. And at some point, something will need to give. And unfortunately, well, speaking from a personal experience, trust me, my son comes first. I will compromise on that job as long as my son is sorted. There's no way I can put my son's life on the line over a job. Not in this lifetime, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
no, I have to agree. I have to agree with that. Um, Guys, I mean, we're almost at the end of the podcast, but we will have another episode. I just want to let the listeners know if you're feeling broken, it's not because you're weak. It might be because you've been in a system that thrives on your silence. Um, so next time we're going to talk about the power play, how managers manipulate without saying a word. If you've ever felt rewarded and punished at the same time, this one's for you. Okay. Until next time, protect your peace, question the culture, and protest with purpose. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
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 Wherever I go, in this world I'm still following that feeling. Always got hope as I'm moving in closer, I can't lose it. Doesn't matter.